because Christmas is anything but simple, we decided that let's go back to a time, let's try to find a time in our history when Christmas was simple, when the biggest activity you had of the week was getting into the car or getting into whatever you rode, and you went to church, and that was the activity for the week. I mean, that was the big moment where you went and you sang Christmas carols, and you began to hear the message about Advent, the message of hope, the message of baby Jesus, and then you went back home, and you went back about your daily life, and that was the activity of the week. Because our lives are so complex now that oftentimes we can get wrapped up in so many different things. And even as a church staff, we were looking at this, and we began to think about Simple Christmas earlier in the year, but we were watching this week and somebody sent us a video of this church in another part of the country that they were trying to just blow the doors off Christmas, and they put tracks up on their ceiling, and they were had a drum line, and they were flying drummers off the plate in lighted drums, and they were dropping them into the place. And somebody said, "This is awesome. Gathering Point should do that." And at that moment, I began to say, "Yeah, that is awesome, but I would rather trade awesome for meaningful any day of the week." Any day of the week. I don't need another awesome, right? You didn't get out of bed this morning because you were like, "Man, I just hope something's awesome." We all gather because we needed something meaningful. And we think one of the most meaningful things we can do today is to connect with our Heavenly Father, connect with your Heavenly Father, so that we can begin to grow and grab this sense of Christmas, which has been around for centuries, and begin to put it into the places that begins to matter most. This morning, I'm going to read you an old Christmas carol. This Christmas carol has been a long time, but it's really the text that we're going to look. We're going to read one of the Advent texts, Isaiah 35 today. And one of the Christmas texts, this was inspired by the Isaiah passage, and it talks about the world in which this carol was written. And this is what it says. It's a ceremony of carols. It says, "This little babe, so few days old, is come to rifle Satan's fold. All hell doth at his presence quake, though he himself for cold doth shake." So now Isaiah, which is the passage we're going to look at today, Isaiah sort of gets his paintbrush out. And Isaiah is an artist. And artists are able to do extraordinary things. They can create emotion through their medium. So whether it's design, whether it's words, whether it's music, artists have the ability to create and make you feel things through the words that they say. And so Isaiah gets this paintbrush out, and he begins to paint this picture of a preferable future, because the world that he lived in was also chaotic and estranged and complex. And so he gets at this, and he begins to go, let's begin to look at this in a different way. So Isaiah chapter 35, he says, "The desert and the parched land will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and bloom like a crocus. It will burst into bloom. It will rejoice greatly and shout for joy. The glory of Lebanon will be given to it, the splendor of Carmel and Sharon. They will see the glory of the Lord, the splendor of our God." And so here's his instructive words. So here's what we need to do. We need to strengthen the feeble hands. We need to steady the knees that often give way. Now, when do our hands get feeble, and when do our knees start to give way? Usually that's because we're motivated by fear or anxiety. So he says, let's strengthen those hands that are nervous, apprehensive. Let's give strength to the knees that are causing us to pause and to wait. And let's say to those with fearful hearts, "Be strong. Do not fear. Your God will come. He will come with vengeance and with divine retribution, but he's going to come and he will save you. And then will the eyes of the blind be opened." Not just physical blindness, but spiritual blindness, emotional blindness, relational blindness. They'll be open. And the ears of the deaf, those who have stopped listening relationally, and those who have stopped to hear and be able to comprehend, they're going to be unstopped. And the lame leap like a deer, and the mute tongue shall shout for joy. Water will gush forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. The burning sand will become a pool, and thirsty ground bubbling springs. In the haunts where jackals once lay, grass and reeds and papyrus will grow, and a highway will be there, and it will be called the way of holiness. It will be for those who walk on that way. The unclean will not journey on it. Wicked fools will not go about on it. No lion will be there, nor any ravenous beast. They will not be found there, but only the redeemed will walk there. And those the Lord has rescued will return. They will enter Zion with singing. Everlasting joy will crown their heads. Gladness and joy will overtake them, and sorrow and sighing will flee away. And so he talks about this highway that's going to be in the middle of nowhere. There's going to be a road that begins to take us from where we are into the confusion and complexity of many of the relationships we have, where it seems like there may not be hope, or there used to be hope, or it's stagnant, or it's stale. And it's going to begin to take us somewhere. And so the words that we see are Christmas words, and it's often the words that we hear at Christmas, which are fear not, right? Fear not. And so every time we read the Christmas story and we have angels show up and we have shepherds and we have Mary and we have all these, and whenever they show up, they say, hey, whoa. Don't fear, fear not. Because fear is often what we feel when our hearts are not at peace. So Jesus is constantly encouraging his followers. He's constantly telling them, hey, don't live lives of fear. Don't live lives of fear, which is easier than it sounds, right? If I were to tell you, if you were afraid of something, I said, hey, stop that. You wouldn't look at me and like, oh, thank you. I didn't think of that. Thank you so much for that wonderful advice. That wouldn't be there. And so the Bible says so much about fear. Instead of looking at the future, he says, instead of looking at the future with your hands shaking and your knees wobbling, the prophet tells us we need to find strength, but there's activity that can be done to strengthen your hands. And there's activity that you can do to strengthen your knees from your feeble knees. But the way to do that, to exercise that, is actually to exercise your heart. Now, I don't mean treadmill, and some of you are like, thank goodness, right? It's not a stress test, because it's a process that begins where your hearts begin to be filled with peace. Because here's what we know, and you know this to be true. It's impossible to be joyful about anything when you are afraid. Because fear limits our life. It constrains it, it pollutes it, and sure, it's great when there's danger, right? It lets you know when there's danger, and that's a good thing. But sometimes it can overwhelm you. I love what Robert Frost said. Robert Frost says, he says, I think he got this right. He says, what frightened him the most were frightened people. I think that's accurate. They do and they say weird and crazy things out of fear. So no wonder Isaiah, when he gets out this, he says, those who have a fearful heart, those who have fear, those who are not at peace right now, those who put their head on the pillow at night and they just stare at the ceiling, those who wake up with a sense of anxiety, he says, be strong, do not fear, because, here's why. Here is your God. He's coming. He's coming. In the Old and the New Testaments both have people who live the same way. They've lived their entire lives between hope and despair, and they've kind of lived in the middle. Between hope and despair, and they live in the middle. And we don't get to control those pieces, but we do get to control our response, and we control our response from our hearts. It's not our head, it's our hearts. And so many of you know about this. We talk about this. We talk about this with our kids all the time. When they go to school every day, we like, what do you get to control? And they roll their eye. I get to control me. Great. How are we doing with that, right? It's now you don't get to control all the other people in your life, and so you don't get to control the weather, right? You'd like to. I'd like to. It's a little chilly today. We like to control, if you're a student, you'd like to control the amount of homework that's assigned to you. You'd like to have control over the fairness of a teacher. You'd like to have control over the fairness of a coach. You'd like to have, more insight into your friends, but you can't, the only thing you get the opportunity to control is you. You can only control you. And so when you get frustrated with your ability to control yourself, usually you lash out at other people. And the Advent begins to show us that there's a way that this baby came so that you can live a way that you don't have war in your heart. Because when your heart turns cold, when my heart turns cold, we see people and we have disgust and anger and war. And that's the opposite of peace. Now, I think this crazy what our hearts are capable of doing. I think it literally is crazy. Isn't it true? And you know this to be true too. Where you can look at some person and you just smile. You just gush. And you can move your head 3 degrees, see another person, and you go, oh. Our hearts are so complex. Because we can see joy and we have war, all within a few degrees of us moving our head. And they both are justified in our hearts. I want to talk about a story I read a couple years ago in The Anatomy of Peace. It's a book and a series kind of by the Arbinger Institute. It's very good. If you've been familiar with those, you understand their kind of value in the business sector, but I think they're very valuable in this. And so in The Anatomy of Peace, there's this dad, and his name is Carl. And Carl has been made to be a successful businessman. He's very successful at business, but he's also known for his temper. He's known for his temper at work. He was known for his temper at work. And no matter what anyone did around Carl, it was wrong, right? So his son had taken out his car one night. He had gone out to be with some friends, and his son had taken the car. And I don't know where they went or what they were doing, but he went and he parked his car, and the person who parked the car next to his son opened their door, and it left a tiny little ding on Carl's dad's vehicle. Well, his son's terrified because he knows what's waiting for him when he goes home. So he goes home, and he drives back, and there's a dent in the door, and, the dent wasn't fair. It wasn't his fault. It's more like a ding, and he went with his friends, and he went out there, and whoever did, they opened their door inadvertently, or if it had been in our county, the wind probably took it and almost ripped it off. And fortunately, it hit another car, so you have to go buy a whole new door, right? And so when it hit the car, it probably left a little indentation. And so when he went home and pulled into the garage, Carl went nuts. Carl went nuts. How did this happen? Well, I went to the movies with my friends, and somebody must have hit it when I came out. There was this little ding in the door. Why did you park next to people? Sure, there's that, right? Because other people went to the movie too. Well, park further away. And he just went on and on and on and on. And he says, you're going to have to pay for the deductible. This is going to be on you, and you're going to be responsible for paying this. And I'm not paying for this. You should have known better where to park and all this. And he exclaimed. Now, here's the irony of the story. Carl's heart was at war, and so his heart was at war with his son. Carl grew up, his dad was a farmer. Carl's dad was a farmer, and he grew up in Greene County. And he grew up on a 10-acre farm, beautiful farm, where he grew up. And there was rolling hills on his farm, and there was a little creek that went through, well, it was more like almost a river. Kind of went through his backyard into the property. And he grew up, and his dad had a 1942 red farm truck with the wooden bed in the back of the truck. That was the car that he grew up with on his farm. And his dad, who was the farmer, was such a loving and caring man, and just a great guy in general. And you could look out, and where he grew up on the 10 acres, it was modest. It was nice, but it was modest. It's not like they were wealthy or anything like that. And so the old 1942 truck, when you turned it on and you started it, it rattled and it coughed like a 90-year-old chain smoker when the truck got going. But it began to go, and it went, and it had that truck forever. So when Carl turned 16, to his surprise, his dad bought a new car. And so Carl asked if he could take the car out to go out with some friends, and his dad said, sure. And Carl went out and started up the car and realized he forgot his wallet and went back inside to grab his wallet. And when he came back out, he saw fresh tracks where the truck once was, the new one, brand new one. And it led right down to the creek. And in that moment, he panicked, he gasped, because he realized he had forgotten to set the parking brake. And he ran down there, and he was terrified, and he went down to the driveway, and he came back, and he realized, that feeling inside of you that realizes, oh my gosh, this is my last day on earth. And you just want to vomit, right? As if that would help. And so he could see the headlights of the car coming up as he went down over the cliff, and he saw it there, and he was motionless and wished he had been stuck underneath the car as it was there. And so he walked up to the farmhouse. He walked up to the farmhouse with tingling in his legs and tingling in his hands and tingling in every part of his body. He thought, how am I going to break this to my dad? And he walked inside, and his dad was sitting in a chair still reading the paper. Now, for those who don't know, a newspaper is something that people used to read. They would open it up, and it'd get a little ink on their hands, and they would read, and that's how you got news. And so he was sitting there reading the paper, and as he walked in and he opened the door and he sees his dad sitting in the paper, it began to run through his mind, I wonder how far away I can run. If I just started running, I'll run away forever. But his dad lowered the newspaper and looked at his son and said, Carl, did you forget something? And there was no avoiding it. So Carl goes, Dad, Dad, the car, Dad, I may have forgotten to set the parking brake and it's in the river. I'm so sorry, Dad, I'm so sorry. I've never been this sorry before in my life. It's the most sorry I've ever been. And what his dad said next, Carl would never forget. His dad still holding the newspaper and said, well, I guess you're going to need to use the old truck then to run your errands. And that was it. No lecture, no visible anger. Now why? Why does that happen? And how does that happen? That's because his dad's heart was at peace. His heart was at peace. And our hearts are complex. I mean, you know it's possible that you can be at war with some people and in love with others. Some are in the same house. This is how some of you are able to love Jesus, love football, right? But then fight like a dog with your boss or a coworker or your spouse or your kids. And it all has to do with how your heart is towards that person. I mean, isn't it true when some of you, when you fell in love, wasn't it true when your heart was warm? Some of you, your hearts were hot, right? And when your heart was warm, when your heart was hot, isn't it true that person could do no wrong? And your parents would be like, oh, hey, I don't know about that person. And you would do what? Oh, no. You don't know, and they're amazing, and they do this wonderful, 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 wonderful. Because your hearts were what? Your heart was warm, hot towards that person. They could do no wrong. But if your heart's cold towards someone, they can do no right. Doesn't matter what they try or how hard they try. It doesn't matter. If your heart's cold towards them, it's going to be wrong. So Carl was stunned. Even though as a child, when he was a teenager, that moment was so impactful towards him, the way that his dad treated him, his heart was at war with his son. And that dent wasn't, caused his fault. It caused him to come unglued. Because Carl saw his son much differently than his dad had seen him. Because Carl saw his son as a problem to be solved. Where Carl's dad saw Carl as a person to be loved. Therefore, when Carl's son came home with a problem, he corrected it versus loving it. So, question today, how fast, and this is personal, don't, try to keep your hands, everything, don't touch anybody, don't wiggle anybody, don't wiggle, right? I don't want to get any ribs. How fast do you go to war with certain people? And who do you go to war with the fastest? And who do you give the most grace to? Because I think it's interesting, the people that we say we love, but then our hearts have turned cold towards them. Because when our hearts aren't at peace, and peace is the simple, simple thing that we talk about at Christmas. I mean, it's just simple, 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 but it's so complicated. Because when our hearts are at war with someone, it poisons us. It poisons our thoughts. It poisons our feelings. It poisons our attitudes. It poisons our ability to even see them. And our hearts go cold. And is there some way, if we're going to put away the violence that's within us, the violence that we express towards others, we have to put away the violence that's in us. And there's no hope of solving the violence that comes out of us until we deal with the violence that's in us, or the trauma, or the hurt, or the pain. Because it's the opposite. When our hearts are warm, you can't do anything wrong. But when our hearts are cold, life is hard. So how do we get our hearts at peace? I think Jesus was right when he begins to ask them, because there are such complicated things that we do, right? When we despise, when we gripe, when we rage, when we belittle, when we degenerate, when we do all those things, it's because our hearts lack peace. It has little to do with the other person. Now, that other person may have done something or triggered something, but that, that's an event. They can't change that event. What happens is the condition of our heart and my heart. And so what we do is we'll justify, and this is where we kind of get at the heart of what we need to deal with today. We justify our thoughts or our feelings and our actions because here's what we do. We think we're entitled to have a heart that's the temperature that our heart is towards a particular person. And that is the enemy of peace. Because peace can't happen if we always feel the need to defend our actions, justifications, temperature of our own heart. Now, I'm not saying that if your heart's at peace, you should get walked on all the time. We are not suggesting that. That's not the way forward. It's just to become a doormat in life. That's not, or what happened doesn't matter. That's not what we're saying. But what happened and what you get to choose is how the temperature of your heart is going to be from this moment forward. Because if your hearts aren't at peace, you're always going to live on the battlefield. So if your heart's not at peace, every day you go to work and you see your coworkers or the people that you work with or work for, you're going to battle every day if your heart's not at peace. And you're going to tell yourself that it's not your fault. Because remember, you can't have peace if you can. So here's what I want to talk about today. There's 4 ways that we justify the temperature of our hearts. I do it, you do it. We may just not think about it very often, so I want to deal with it today. The 4 ways we justify is, 1, we literally think that we're better than someone else. Where we think, you may not say this, because it's just not nice to say this, and you're sophisticated and we're sophisticated, so we wouldn't say it this way, but what our hearts are saying is, you are so stupid, right? You're so dumb. Why would you do that? I would never have done that. And it's a justification that we immediately see our reaction and our response as better than someone else's response. Therefore, we're justified to have a cold heart towards them because we literally think that we are better than they are. Oh, I would never say that. I would never say that. I know you wouldn't say that. It's just what's in your heart. Second thing we do to kind of justify the temperature of our heart is we realize that we deserve. I deserve. People owe me. People don't appreciate me. I deserve, right? They need to do this. It's unfair. What happened is unfair. I feel entitled. I'm deprived. People owe me. And I don't understand why people don't give me the respect and grant me all that which I'm owed. And as a result of feeling like I deserve and I'm the one that should and all this sort of stuff, the temperature of our hearts remain very, very cold in those types of environments. Third thing we do is how people see you. This is where we tell people, and this is a way that we justify our behavior towards them too. You talk about how overwhelmed you are, how much you have to do, I hear this, I would get to that, but I have just so much to do. I can't get it all done, and I have, kids, and I got work, and I got all these things to do, and I'm so stressed out on all this right now. And what it is, this is justifying of why the temperature of your heart is. And how people see me. And if people can see me as tired and overwhelmed and stressed out, then maybe they'll have empathy for me, but actually, it's a justification for your heart to go at war because you see yourself and you want other people to see you so that you can get pity. Now, we talked about pity last week, and that's terrible, terrible, terrible. It's like a cancer for your emotions because it just eats and eats and eats until you feel like you just deserve. What you need is honor and respect, not pity. And so what happens here is you want people to see you so that you can excuse your way through life. And then others will enable you by just going, oh, yeah, they're so busy. Oh, my goodness, they're so busy. I don't know how they do it. I just don't know how they do it. And it's a way that we justify the temperature of our hearts towards someone else. And the fourth one we do is worse than. Now, this one is a tricky little booger. This is where we beat ourselves down. We think we're not good enough. We just assume I'm not good enough. I'll never be good enough. I'm not enough. We just intentionally kind of reduce our value. Maybe we do it so we do it before somebody else does, but we just kind of self-assume. So I can't do it, and I'm so broken, and I'm not as blessed as other people, and other people have such an easy way, and it's never easy for me, and it's never all these kinds of things. And I can feel the way that I feel because I'm less than. When we start to cycle through those justification points, my heart will not be at peace. And it will be everyone around me's fault, or a couple people's fault, or one or two people's fault. But it's going to steal my peace, because these are all justification sicknesses. And we use justification because we're driven by fear. And we justify and assume that we can't have peace. And so Isaiah comes. He comes on this Sunday, and today is the second Sunday of Advent, and so the purple candle's being lit out in the shot today. The purple candle's there, and it's the travel to Bethlehem candle, and it's a form of peace. How are they able to go from up in the Galilee region down to Bethlehem? How has that happened? Well, their hearts were at peace. And so today, the same question, is your heart at peace? If not, you will not have a simple Christmas. It won't be. Because as you go to office parties, and as you have family come in, and as you go to family, you're going to see faces. And the moment you see those faces, you're going to start to justify why the temperature of your heart is the way that it is. And that needs to change. And the bad news of Christmas is Christmas may change you. And you may have to give up some control of justification in your life. Because no conflict can be resolved as long as both people think they are right. And as long as you see people as a problem to be solved, or a situation to be managed, your heart will never be at peace, which means those around you will never be okay. People are to be loved. Problems are to be solved. People are not problems. Are you ready to become healed from the desire to justify? Because Isaiah said this, here's what we need to do. We need to strengthen the feeble hands. They're just tired. They're afraid. You're afraid of turning the temperature of your heart warmer towards someone. You got to steady the knees that give way. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong. Don't get bullied. Don't get knocked over. Be strong. But you don't have to justify anymore. Don't fear. Your God will come. He will come with vengeance, with divine retribution, and he will come to save the temperature of your heart. We believe that something cosmic happened in the universe as a result of Jesus coming, where evil and suffering are put into their place. So my prayer for you is the same prayer that I have for myself, is that we would allow Christ to come into our hearts to put the poisonous justifying thoughts in their place. So this morning, we've kind of inverted the service. And we want to offer you an opportunity to worship the Lord today. But as you worship, I pray that you would have a simple Christmas. And one of the best ways you can have a simple Christmas is to stop having your heart at war. And I know when you begin to implement that, your Christmas will change because you won't see people as problems. You'll see people as opportunities to show love and grace. So Matt's going to lead us and sing us in that direction this morning.
Thanks so much for joining us today. If you love the content you heard and you'd like to know when the new content becomes available, scroll down and like and subscribe to our channel. Again, thanks so much for being here today, and we can't wait to see you next week.